Tensions across the Middle East rose sharply overnight after reports emerged of coordinated strikes targeting major energy infrastructure across several Gulf countries. Early monitoring networks in the region detected unusual aerial activity before explosions were reported almost simultaneously in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Bahrain. Initial claims from Iranian state-linked sources suggested the attacks were carried out in response to what Tehran described as a prior strike on its gas facilities. Officials in the region have not confirmed all details, but multiple independent observers reported fires at large industrial sites connected to oil production. The first confirmed incident was reported near the Karai oil field in eastern Saudi Arabia, one of the country's important locations for crude extraction. Witness accounts described loud explosions followed by large flames rising from within the facility, with smoke visible from several kilometers away. Emergency crews were quickly dispatched to the area as parts of the field were shut down to prevent further damage to pipelines and storage units. Energy analysts noted that even limited damage at a site of this size can interrupt production due to the complex network of equipment involved. Within minutes of the Saudi reports, similar alerts began to circulate from Kuwait, where activity was detected near the Mina Al-Amadi refinery complex. The refinery is one of the largest in the region, processing significant volumes of crude oil each day for domestic use and international export markets. Local sources reported multiple impacts inside the industrial zone, followed by fires that appeared to spread through connected processing sections. Because refinery systems are tightly linked, damage in one unit can force operators to halt operations across larger parts of the facility for safety reasons. Fire response teams were seen moving into the area while authorities restricted access to surrounding roads as a precaution against further explosions. Not long after the Kuwait incident, reports also began to emerge from Bahrain, where alarms were triggered near the Bapco refinery site. Residents nearby described hearing a series of blasts before seeing smoke rising from inside the refinery complex, though officials released limited details. The Bapco facility plays a central role in Bahrain's energy sector, making any disruption there significant for both the local economy and regional supply. Across the three countries, the timing of the incident suggested a coordinated operation rather than separate accidents or isolated technical failures. Security analysts said the pattern of strikes appeared designed to target infrastructure with high economic value rather than civilian locations. Iranian media outlets later described the operation as a warning response, claiming it was meant to demonstrate the ability to reach strategic targets. Governments in the affected countries have not confirmed the source of the attacks but stated that investigations were underway at all impacted sites. Oil markets reacted immediately to the reports, with traders closely watching the situation amid concerns that supply disruptions could affect prices. Even temporary shutdowns in the Gulf region can influence global energy flows because a large share of the world's oil passes through these facilities. Industry experts explained that restarting damaged energy infrastructure often takes time due to safety inspections and the need to repair sensitive equipment. Satellite monitoring services later released images showing heat signatures at multiple locations consistent with ongoing fires at industrial facilities. Emergency response operations continued for several hours as crews worked to contain flames and prevent the spread of damage to nearby storage tanks. Authorities in the region increased security around other major installations as a precaution against the possibility of additional strikes. Military observers noted that the scale and coordination of the incidents could signal a shift in the current level of confrontation in the region. Diplomatic channels were reported to be active as several governments called for restraint to prevent the situation from developing into a wider conflict. Despite the damage reports, officials emphasized that essential services remained operational while assessments of the affected facilities continued. As night fell across the Gulf, fires were still visible at some locations, highlighting the seriousness of the incident and the uncertainty about what might follow. By early morning, regional authorities began releasing limited statements confirming that emergency teams were still working inside several affected energy facilities. Officials in Saudi Arabia reported that safety systems had been activated at the Karai field, allowing operators to isolate damaged sections from the rest of the network. Engineers on site focused on preventing pressure buildup inside pipelines, a situation that can lead to secondary explosions if not controlled quickly. In Kuwait, refinery workers were evacuated from certain processing zones while specialized fire crews moved in with equipment designed for fuel-based fires. Industrial fires at refineries require careful handling because water alone cannot extinguish burning petroleum, forcing responders to use foam systems instead. Authorities in Bahrain stated that the situation at the Bapco refinery was stable but confirmed that parts of the facility had been temporarily shut down. Power and cooling systems in the affected areas were turned off as a precaution, a move that can slow damage but also delays the return to normal production. Security forces increased patrols near ports, pipelines, and storage terminals across the Gulf as governments prepared for the possibility of further incidents. Regional air defense units were also placed on higher alert after radar systems detected objects entering sensitive airspace before the explosions occurred. Military officials did not provide details about what was detected, but sources said the alerts were treated as credible enough to trigger defensive measures. Analysts noted that energy infrastructure has long been considered a vulnerable target because of its economic importance and wide geographic spread. Large oil fields and refineries often cover vast areas, making it difficult to fully protect every section even with advanced surveillance systems. In recent years, several countries in the region have invested heavily in air defense technology to reduce the risk of attacks on critical facilities. Despite those efforts, experts say no system can guarantee full protection when multiple sites are targeted within a short period of time. Financial markets reacted cautiously as trading opened, with oil prices showing early volatility while investors waited for confirmation about the scale of damage. Shipping companies also began reviewing routes through the Gulf, although no major changes were announced during the first hours after the incident. International energy agencies stated that global supply remained stable for the moment, but warned that prolonged shutdowns could change the situation quickly. Governments outside the region called for calm, urging all sides to avoid further actions that could threaten stability in one of the world's key energy corridors. Diplomatic statements from several countries emphasized the need for verification before assigning responsibility for the strikes. Meanwhile, Iranian officials repeated earlier claims that the operation was a response to what they described as aggression against their own energy assets. No independent confirmation of the earlier incident inside Iranian territory was immediately available, leaving parts of the situation unclear. Intelligence analysts said that conflicting reports are common in the early hours after events involving military or covert operations. Satellite imagery released later in the day appeared to show burn marks near storage areas in at least 2 of the reported strike locations. Experts reviewing the images said the damage looked limited to specific sections, suggesting the attacks may have been aimed at precise targets. Targeted strikes on industrial infrastructure can be intended to send a political message without causing complete destruction of the facility. Even so, the psychological effect of hitting multiple sites in different countries can be as significant as the physical damage itself. Workers at several nearby installations were told to remain on standby as companies reviewed safety procedures and checked equipment for possible risks. Insurance firms that cover shipping and energy operations began monitoring the situation closely, as conflict risk can affect costs across the industry. Regional leaders held emergency meetings to review security conditions and discuss possible responses if further attacks were to occur. As investigations continued, the focus shifted from the initial explosions to the broader question of whether the region was entering a new phase of tension. As the day progressed, more governments began commenting on the situation, calling for restraint while requesting verified information about the reported strikes. Officials in Washington said they were closely monitoring developments in the Gulf but did not confirm whether U.S.-linked facilities were involved. European leaders also urged caution, warning that any escalation in the region could have serious consequences for global energy markets. Defense analysts noted that the choice of targets suggested careful planning rather than a spontaneous response to a single incident. Striking energy infrastructure across several countries requires coordination, timing, and the ability to bypass or overwhelm defensive systems. This raised concerns among security experts that the operation may have been intended to demonstrate reach rather than cause maximum destruction. In previous regional confrontations, attacks on oil facilities have been used to apply pressure without triggering full-scale war. However, hitting multiple countries at once increases the risk that one of them could respond in a way that widens the conflict. Military observers reported increased aircraft activity over parts of the Gulf, though officials described the movements as precautionary patrols. Naval forces in the area were also said to be operating at a higher level of readiness as commanders reviewed possible threat scenarios. Commercial airlines adjusted some flight paths over the region, avoiding certain airspace while authorities reviewed safety conditions. Oil companies with operations in the Gulf activated emergency protocols, including checks on communication systems and backup power supplies. Engineers at several facilities began detailed inspections to make sure that shock waves from nearby explosions had not damaged critical equipment. Even when a strike does not hit directly, vibrations can affect valves, sensors, and control systems that are essential for safe operation. Energy specialists explained that restoring full production after an incident often takes longer than expected because of strict safety requirements. Governments in the region reassured markets that reserves were available if needed, though they did not provide exact figures. Traders continued to react to every new report, with prices moving up and down as uncertainty about the situation remained high. Some analysts warned that the psychological impact of the attacks could be more important than the actual physical damage. When critical infrastructure is shown to be vulnerable, companies and governments may change plans even if production losses are limited. Diplomatic contacts between several regional capitals were reported throughout the day as leaders tried to prevent further escalation. Statements released after those talks emphasized the need to avoid actions that could lead to retaliation or miscalculation. At the same time, military officials did not rule out the possibility that additional security measures could be introduced if needed. Intelligence sources said it was still too early to determine exactly how the strikes were carried out or what weapons were used. Investigators were examining radar data, satellite images, and on-site evidence to reconstruct the sequence of events. Because the incidents happened within a short time frame, analysts believe the operation may have been planned well in advance. Questions also remained about whether the strikes were intended as a one-time response or part of a broader strategy. In past conflicts, limited attacks have sometimes been followed by periods of calm, but they have also led to cycles of retaliation. Regional residents expressed concern as news coverage showed images of smoke rising from facilities that are normally seen as secure. For many people living near the Gulf's industrial zones, the events were a reminder of how closely daily life is tied to regional stability. By the end of the day, officials were still assessing the damage, while the wider world watched for signs of what might happen next. Damage assessment teams were allowed into some of the affected areas once fires were brought under control, though access remained restricted in high-risk zones. Engineers focused first on storage tanks, pipelines, and control rooms, since damage in those areas can prevent an entire facility from operating safely. Early findings suggested that the strikes had hit specific sections rather than destroying entire complexes, but repairs could still take considerable time. Officials said safety inspections must be completed before restarting production, a process that cannot be rushed without risking further accidents. In Saudi Arabia, energy authorities confirmed that output had been reduced temporarily while technicians worked to secure equipment at the Karahi field. Kuwait's oil ministry reported that the Mina al-Ahmadi refinery remained stable, although several processing units were shut down as a precaution. In Bahrain, the Bapco refinery continued limited operations, but some areas were isolated while investigators examined the source of the explosions. Governments avoided assigning blame publicly, but security agencies were actively reviewing intelligence to determine who carried out the operation. Diplomatic officials warned that any confirmed attack on multiple countries could force a coordinated response, increasing the risk of wider confrontation. Regional alliances were tested as leaders discussed whether the incident should be treated as an isolated event or part of a larger pattern. Analysts noted that the Gulf's energy network is closely connected, meaning disruption in one country can affect supply routes across the region. Because of that connection, even limited damage can create uncertainty in markets, especially when the cause of the incident remains unclear. Oil traders continue to react cautiously, with prices fluctuating as new reports appeared and officials released updates throughout the day. Shipping companies operating near the Strait of Hormuz reviewed security procedures, though no major closures were announced. The strait remains one of the world's most important oil transit routes, making any sign of conflict in the area a concern for global trade. Military experts said the latest events showed how quickly tensions can rise when strategic infrastructure becomes part of a political dispute. In recent years, several incidents involving tankers, pipelines, and refineries have demonstrated the vulnerability of energy facilities in the region. Each event has increased pressure on governments to improve defenses while also avoiding actions that could lead to direct conflict. Officials in several countries repeated calls for dialogue, saying that miscalculation could turn a limited exchange into a much larger crisis. At the same time, defense forces remained on alert, prepared for the possibility that more strikes could follow the first wave. Intelligence analysts said the coordinated timing suggested planning that may have taken weeks or months before the operation was launched. Investigators also looked at whether the attacks were meant to send a signal rather than cause maximum destruction of the facilities. In many past confrontations, limited but highly visible strikes have been used to show capability without crossing the line into open war. Even so, the risk remains that one side could misinterpret the message and respond with greater force than originally expected. Residents living near industrial zones reported hearing alarms during the night as security systems were tested after the incidents. Companies advised workers to remain cautious while checks continued on equipment that could have been affected by shock waves. Insurance and energy firms held emergency meetings to evaluate possible financial impact if production delays continued. Governments in the region emphasized that supply commitments would be met, but acknowledged that repairs could take time. As more information became available, attention shifted from the fires themselves to the political consequences of the operation. With investigations still underway, the central question remained whether the strikes were the end of the incident or the beginning of something larger. As the investigation continued, international attention remained fixed on the Gulf, where even small incidents can have consequences far beyond the region. Energy markets, governments, and security agencies all watched closely for signs that the situation might calm down or move toward further escalation. Officials from several countries called for restraint, warning that additional strikes on critical infrastructure could trigger unpredictable reactions. Diplomatic channels remained active as leaders spoke privately, attempting to prevent the events from turning into a wider confrontation. Analysts said the targeting of energy facilities carries particular risk because such sites are tied directly to global supply and economic stability. When production or transport is threatened in the Gulf, the effects can be felt far beyond the region, influencing prices and political decisions worldwide. For that reason, even limited damage to oil fields or refineries often draws a stronger international response than other types of incidents. Military observers continue to report increased readiness among forces stationed in the area, though officials described the measures as precautionary. Air patrols, naval movements, and security checks were expanded as commanders prepared for the possibility that more attacks could occur. At the same time, governments stressed that no decision had been made about retaliation, and that the focus remained on confirming the facts. Investigators worked to determine how the strikes were carried out, including what type of weapons were used and how they reached their targets. Satellite images and radar records were being studied in detail to understand the sequence of events leading up to the explosions. Experts said the accuracy of the impacts suggested careful planning, but warned that conclusions could not be made until all evidence was reviewed. Energy companies also continued their own assessments, checking equipment for hidden damage that might not be visible from the outside. In large industrial systems, even minor faults can cause serious problems later if production is restarted too quickly. For workers at the affected sites, the priority remained safety, as teams moved slowly through damaged areas to prevent further accidents. Residents living near the facilities watched closely as smoke cleared, waiting for confirmation that the danger had passed. Across the region, the events served as a reminder that the balance between stability and conflict can shift very quickly. In recent years, the Gulf has experienced several moments of tension, but each new incident raises concern about how far the situation could go. Governments now face the challenge of responding firmly enough to protect their interests while avoiding steps that could lead to open conflict. Analysts say this balance is difficult, especially when attacks involve infrastructure that affects more than one country at the same time. The latest strikes have shown that even heavily protected facilities remain vulnerable when multiple targets are chosen in a coordinated operation. As a result, security around oil fields, refineries, and transport routes is expected to remain tight in the coming days. Diplomatic efforts are also likely to continue, as regional leaders try to prevent the situation from moving into a cycle of retaliation. History has shown that conflicts involving energy infrastructure often begin with limited actions but can grow if responses are not carefully managed. For now, officials say the priority is to restore normal operations, confirm the extent of the damage, and reduce the chance of further incidents. Whether those goals can be achieved will depend on decisions made in the days ahead by governments both inside and outside the region. The events have once again demonstrated how closely global stability is tied to the security of a few critical locations in the Gulf. As investigations continue and repairs move forward, the world remains alert, aware that the situation could change with little warning. For the moment, the fires are being contained, but the uncertainty that followed the strikes may last much longer than the flames themselves.